I've always loved working as a park ranger in the Rocky Mountains National Park. The fresh air, the scenic views, the wildlife. It was my dream job. But everything changed one night when I encountered something that defied all logic and reason. It was a cold and dark night in late October. I was patrolling the park in my truck, making sure there were no campers or hikers out after hours. The park was closed for the season, and I was the only ranger on duty. I had a radio and a flashlight, but no weapon. I didn't think I would need one. I was driving along a dirt road that led to a remote lookout point. I had been there many times before, and I knew it had a spectacular view of the stars. I decided to stop there for a few minutes and enjoy the night sky. I parked my truck, turned off the engine, and got out. The silence was deafening. The only sounds were my own breathing and the crunching of leaves under my boots. I walked to the edge of the cliff and looked up. The sky was clear and full of stars. I felt a sense of awe and wonder. I was about to go back to my truck when I heard a loud roar from behind me. It sounded like a mix of a bear and a lion, but deeper and more menacing. I turned around and saw a huge creature standing on its hind legs in the shadows of the trees. It looked like a gorilla, but bigger and more muscular. It had long black fur, glowing red eyes, and sharp teeth. It was holding a dead deer in its arms, blood dripping from its mouth. I froze in fear. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Was this some kind of prank? A costume? A hallucination? No, it was real, and it was looking right at me. It dropped the deer and let out another roar. It started to run towards me faster than any animal I had ever seen. I knew I had no chance of outrunning it or fighting it off. I reached for my radio, hoping to call for help. But before I could press the button, it grabbed me by the neck and lifted me off the ground. It brought me closer to its face and sniffed me. It growled and bared its teeth. I felt its hot breath on my skin. I thought it was going to rip me apart. But then something strange happened. It stopped growling and looked into my eyes. It seemed to recognize me somehow. It tilted its head and made a soft sound like a whimper. It loosened its grip on my neck and gently put me down. I was too shocked and scared to move or speak. It stared at me for a few seconds, then turned around and ran back into the woods, leaving me alone. I don't know what it was or why it spared me. Maybe it sensed that I meant no harm. Maybe it remembered me from some previous encounter. Maybe it was just curious. I never saw it again, nor did anyone else. I reported the incident to my supervisor, but he didn't believe me. He said I must have imagined it or dreamed it. He said there was no such thing as a gorilla-like creature in the park. But I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there somewhere, hiding in the dark. I was a park ranger at Yellowstone National Park, and in the summer of 2019, I experienced something that I could not explain. I had heard stories of paranormal activity within the park, but I had never experienced it firsthand until that day. I was on a routine patrol, driving through the vast wilderness of the park, keeping an eye out for any signs of trouble. As I was driving, I noticed a figure in the distance, lying on the ground. At first I thought it was a hiker taking a rest, but as I got closer, I realized it was a dead body. I pulled over and approached the body. It was a man, middle-aged, with a look of terror frozen on his face. His clothes were torn and blood-stained, and there were deep cuts and bruises all over his body. It was clear that he had been attacked by some kind of wild animal, but I had never seen anything like this before. As I tried to process what I was seeing, I heard a strange noise coming from the trees. It was a low, guttural growl, and it was getting closer. I reached for my gun, but before I could even draw it, I saw a large, dark shape lunge out of the trees towards me. I fired my gun, but it was too late. The creature was already on top of me, knocking me to the ground. I struggled to fight it off, but it was too strong. I could feel its hot breath on my face as it bared its teeth and prepared to strike. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the creature suddenly stopped and disappeared back into the trees. I was left lying on the ground, dazed and confused. I couldn't believe what had just happened. As I lay there trying to catch my breath, I realized that the dead man's body had disappeared. There was no trace of him anywhere. It was as if he had never been there at all. I reported the incident to my superiors, but they were skeptical. They assumed that I had simply seen a bear or some other wild animal, and that the dead body had been dragged away by scavengers. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that it was something far more sinister. In the days and weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I would hear strange noises in the woods, and sometimes catch glimpses of dark shapes moving just out of sight. Eventually, I began to piece together a theory of what had happened. I believed that the dead man had been attacked by some kind of supernatural creature, possibly a werewolf or some other shapeshifter, and I believed that the creature had been drawn to me because I had witnessed the attack. I knew that I had to be careful, that I was in danger, but I also knew that I couldn't let this go. I had to find out the truth, no matter what the cost. Over the next few weeks, I delved deeper into the park's history, looking for any clues that might help me solve the mystery. I read about strange sightings, mysterious disappearances, and unexplained phenomena, and I began to realize that there was a dark and powerful force at work in the park, something that had been there for centuries. As my investigation continued, I began to experience more and more strange occurrences. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find my cabin filled with an icy cold mist, or hear strange whispers coming from the shadows. One night, as I was walking through the woods, I saw a figure in the distance. It was tall and shadowy. I couldn't quite make out what the figure was, but I knew it wasn't a bear or any other animal that lived in the park. As I got closer, I could see that it was a human-like figure, but with long, pointed ears and a snarling, wolf-like face. My heart raced as I raised my gun, but before I could pull the trigger, the figure vanished into thin air. I was left standing there, alone and terrified, wondering if what I'd just seen was real or just a trick of the mind. From that moment on, I knew that I had to leave the park. I couldn't stay there any longer, not with the dangers that lurked in the shadows. But as I packed up my belongings and prepared to leave, I knew that I had uncovered a dark secret that would stay with me for the rest of my life. As I drove away from Yellowstone National Park, I couldn't help but wonder what other mysteries lay hidden within its boundaries. I knew that there were things out there that could not be explained, and that the park held secrets that were best left undisturbed. But I also knew that I had a duty to warn others, to tell them of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. And so, as I left the park behind, I made a promise to myself that I would never forget what had happened, and that I would do everything in my power to keep others safe from the darkness that lay hidden within the heart of Yellowstone. I was a park ranger in a small national park in the middle of the forest. It was a quiet park, and I was used to dealing with lost hikers and campers. But one day, I experienced something that I could not explain. It was a warm summer day, and I was out on patrol when I received a call about a missing baby. The baby had been out on a family camping trip when it had disappeared, and the parents were frantic with worry. I immediately set out to search the park, calling out the baby's name and scanning the trees for any sign of movement. As I searched, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something sinister and malevolent. I pushed the feeling aside and continued my search. As I entered a dense thicket of trees, I heard a faint sound like a baby's cry. My heart raced as I followed the sound, hoping that I was getting closer to the missing baby. As I pushed my way through the thicket, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large tree, and in the tree's branches was a nest. And inside the nest, to my shock and amazement, was the missing baby. The baby was safe and unharmed, but as I reached out to take it, I saw something move in the shadows. It was a dark, shadowy figure lurking just out of sight. I reached for my gun, but before I could draw it, the figure disappeared. It was like it had never been there at all, but the feeling of dread remained, and I knew that there was something not quite right about what had just happened. As I brought the baby back to its parents, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than a simple missing baby case. There was something dark and powerful at work in the park, something that I could not explain. Over the next few days, I began to experience strange occurrences. I would hear whispers in the woods and feel a cold, icy presence surrounding me. It was as if something was trying to communicate with me, to warn me of something that I could not yet see. And then, one night, I saw it. The shadowy figure that I had seen in the clearing reappeared, standing just outside my cabin. It was tall and dark, with glowing red eyes and a snarling, twisted face. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. I raised my gun, but before I could fire, the figure vanished into thin air. I was left standing there, alone and terrified, wondering what kind of dark forces were at work in the park. Over the next few weeks, I delved deeper into the park's history, searching for any clues that might help me understand what was happening. And what I found was terrifying. The park had a long history of strange occurrences, from disappearances to sightings of strange creatures in the woods. There were stories of witches and demons, of curses and dark magic. As I dug deeper, I realized that the park was a nexus of paranormal activity, a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin, and I knew that I was in the middle of it, caught in the middle of a battle between forces that I could not begin to understand. In the end, I decided that I had to leave the park. I couldn't stay there any longer, not with the dangers that lurked in the shadows. But as I drove away, I knew that I had uncovered a dark secret that would stay with me for the rest of my life. And I knew that I had a duty to warn others, to tell them of the dangers that lurked in the park. Because even though I was leaving, I couldn't just forget what I had seen and experienced. I needed to warn others who might come to the park and unknowingly put themselves in danger. So, I decided to write a report about my experiences and findings in the park. I detailed the strange occurrences, the sightings of creatures that defied explanation, and the history of dark magic and curses that seemed to be intertwined with the park's very existence. I submitted the report to the park authorities, hoping that they would take it seriously and take measures to protect the visitors to the park. But to my dismay, they dismissed my report as the ramblings of an overactive imagination. Undeterred, I continued to spread the word about the dangers of the park. I spoke to friends and colleagues, warning them of the strange happenings and urging them to stay away from the park. Over time, my warnings began to gain traction, and more people started to take notice. The park authorities eventually took action, investigating the strange occurrences and taking measures to protect the visitors to the park. Today, the park is still open to visitors, but it is a much safer place than it was before. And I take comfort in knowing that I played a small part in making it so. But I still wonder about the mysteries that I uncovered in the park, the forces that I could not explain or understand. And sometimes late at night I can still feel a cold, icy presence surrounding me, as if something is trying to communicate with me from beyond the veil.